Thank you all for coming out today. This is going to be a fantastic event. It's going to be really, really interesting for me because this will be the first time I'm actually going to be presenting to the people that taught me, basically, because the other speakers that are here today are the people I've been learning from for the past 6 years, and they're amazing. The content that they're going to deliver to you it's going to open your eyes in hopefully some beautiful ways. So without further ado, let's get into our presentation. So what we're going to be focused on today here is the integration of sustainable and regenerative systems into facility design and specifically just cultivation in general. So a little bit about who I am. My name is Ben Morgan Dillon. I've been a cultivator for 16 or so years now. I've been in the industry professionally for 6 years, and it's been a passion basically as long as I can remember. I actually just found out that I am not the first one in my family to be a cannabis cultivator. This is actually a photo of my great-great-great-grandfather, who is a research professor and the head of LaSalle Research Institute doing hemp and cannabis cultivation in Austria. So let's start with defining sustainability. These are some slides that I'm going to run through really, really quickly, guys, because we're already a little bit behind. So feel free to take pictures if you want. These are just basic definitions of what sustainability is as defined by the EPA in the United Nations. Now, the philosophy of sustainability is something that's very important and often overlooked. People think about sustainability in just bottom lines. They don't think of it in terms of how you get there and why we get there, the reasons behind the things that we do. So what I want you to think about throughout this presentation is not just what I'm telling you to do or recommending, but why that would be important to you, why it would be important to your systems, why it would be important to your communities. So the core principles of sustainability: to satisfy human needs. The whole reason we do this is because we have needs that are consumptive and we need to be able to work around that. We want to be able to enhance the environmental quality of the natural resources that we can. We want to be efficient with the use of these non-renewable resources so that way we can utilize them but not overutilize them. We don't want them to be diminished at the end of the cycle. This all leads to being able to have a sustainable economic viability for farms, which at the end of the day, no matter how much we love what we do, if it is not economically viable, then it is not something that we can continue to do, and therefore it is not sustainable. A lot of people only think of sustainability in terms of the environment, ecology, biology, but sustainability is an entire systemic thing. It is every aspect of what we do. And the final thing is to be able to enhance the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. Everything that we should do should have a net positive impact if possible. So let's go to regenerative now. 2 quick definitions of regenerative sustainability for you. Then we move to the philosophy of regenerative ag. What we focus on when we're trying to do something regeneratively is truly biomimicry. We are trying to replicate the things that nature has already learned, the cycles that have already been created. We are not smarter or really more capable than natural cycles because they outcompete each other, which means that they are proven to be effective and efficient, and that's why they've been able to survive and sustain. As we move forward through our relationship with regenerative agriculture, we should really think about, like I said, how it is intimate to us personally. Form a relationship with it. It matters because your passion will drive your progress. I can attest to that personally. So the 7 Ps of agriculture. This is sort of the core principles, if you will, of regenerative agriculture. It starts with pluralism, which is basically our ability to increase diversity. We're talking about plants, microbes, and macro and micro arthropods. Anything that we can bring excess life in, it really will help to overall balance and stabilize the system. That leads to more protection. So more protection allows for our soil to not be degraded over time through a lack of proper coverage. We need to have plants covering the soil all the time if possible, so that way we're able to protect our microbes and keep them happy. And that leads us to a lack of needing fertilizers, which leads us to purity. So if we're able to use purity, we can actually eliminate the need for a lot of these things by no longer requiring those external inputs because we're able to utilize biomimicry to keep those natural cycles flowing. Which leads us to permanence. When you have all of these things working together in harmony, we have a lot more perennials that are willing to come back, things that are thriving and surviving, coming back season after season, and not just weeds. Things that we actually want, which leads us to peace. Past patterns of pests and weeds will be diminished because you will have a sustainable ecological system. Things will find their balance, and you're able to work within the economic thresholds. This doesn't just apply to cannabis cultivation, this applies to all agriculture. Finally, we get towards potential. This is when we start to actually see nutrient cycling happening, and you were really having thriving biology in your soil, and it will actually lead to migration of nutrients through your soil system, which overall leads us to progress. We have an incredible process that revitalizes our soil, brings biodiversity back to it, brings life and nutrient cycling back into your soil, which allows for this overall structural improvement. So why does this matter to us? Why should we care about sustainability and regenerative practices? Why should we be interested in this type of work besides, our own curiosities, our own hobbies, shall we say? Really what it comes down to is the globe, our world, our communities, and our families. Our current global situation is starting to look rather grim. We have diminished soil over our entire Earth. We have very minimal water resources, which are rapidly dwindling, especially when you look at our freshwater resources. It's only 0.5% of the available water in the world, and we are actually rapidly diminishing that. This is why we should care, because these things that we can do in our small communities can have vast rippling impacts. This is an interesting slide that it basically shows the rate of soil degradation that we've had across the world over the past million years, but really if you focus on the past 100 years, you'll see that there's sharp increase. So let's bring this a little bit closer now. We've looked at the world and why this matters. Now let's look at our own environment here in Massachusetts. Our Massachusetts cannabis market's consumption. We're currently utilizing 10% of all industrial electricity in our state. That is a massive carbon footprint. That is not sustainable. That is one of the biggest things that I'm going to focus on with you today. Is part of facility design is resource consumption. Not the amendments you put into your soil, not the nutrient cycling aspects as much, but the other systems which play a massive role in your facility's cultivation, but are something that is often overlooked when you think about sustainability. So because of this, the CCC has limited us. We're allowed 36 watts per square foot. This is difficult to work around, but you get proper lighting, you think about your overlaps, and you're able to really work within this. But then water. What about water consumption? We really need to think about not just utilizing water and bringing it into the system, but recapturing it within the system and reintegrating it right back in. All forms of energy are important, and energy does not just come in the form of electricity. Energy is labor, energy is movement, energy is water, energy is heat. So when we think about a system, we think about every aspect of that system. So this brings us to considerations for facility design. When you're designing a facility, a lot of people, they just go right to an architect because that's what architects do. They build buildings. But most architects have never grown at large scale. Most architects have never worked with regenerative systems. Most architects have not worked, even if they have worked with cannabis, worked with large scale beds, which can breathe at a very different rate than when you're dealing with rock wool or hydroponics or even drain to waste systems. So you have to have somebody who understands the intricacy of these systems and is able to work within those systems and tie them all together beyond just being able to develop floor plans, HVAC systems, all of these integral parts, but just treating them as solo units. So the first thing that you want to think about when you're designing a sustainable facility is that your OpEx is going to be much lower than your CapEx. Now what I mean by that is your operational expenses should be lower than your original capital expenses. So when you build your facility, you're going to have to spend more money to build sustainability into your facility than if you were to just build the facility a conventional way. But what that does in the long run is it allows you to have lower operational expenses, which will in the long run drive your profit margins, and that is sustainability. If you want to have a facility that's able to hit the 10-year mark and still be thriving in the market, you need to be thinking at day one of construction, or not even construction, in design, about where you're going to be at 10 years, what your price points are going to be, what your operational expenses are going to be, and that needs to be your driving cost, not what your original capital expenditure thought was going to be. So when you're selecting floor plans, one of the biggest things that I see people get hung up on is that they honestly just don't think of workflow. They're not growers. They're not people that have been in there moving plants around thinking about the cycle that you're going to be utilizing when you're going from mother to propagation to vegetation and into flowering. So they don't think about necessarily not backtracking. There's a lot of wasted time that I see in facilities. And let's be honest, labor is one of your largest, if not your largest expense. So you need to minimize that right off the bat by having systems that utilize lean operations and allow you to really maximize your labor and minimize that expense, because that's never going to go away. Labor is not something that you can pay off. A design should also be really, really redundant. What I mean by that is you can always count on something's going to go wrong. It's an inevitability. Something will always happen. Now, how do you deal with it? How do you isolate it? How are you able to limit its ability to spread and react to it through IPM or security, or also even just energy utilization? So when you're thinking about equipment, a lot of people think about efficiency of equipment, but they don't think about integration efficiency. They don't think about how your lights and your HVAC work with your irrigation system. They think about each one being efficient within its utilization and its specific niche, but they don't necessarily think about how these systems play together. Now, when we're doing regenerative agriculture, we're often running in beds or very, very large pots. When you have this amount of biodiversity, this amount of life going on in your soil, it breathes very, very differently than something like cocoa that's got added nutrients or biology to it. And I mean, rock wool doesn't really breathe at all. So you have so much more in that atmosphere, so many more factors that you're going to have to account for and that your HVAC needs to deal with than a standard facility design, or even just going to big ag, going to lettuce production, hydroponic facilities. They're such different environments, and they fluctuate throughout the day because the cannabis plant breathes like most plants don't. So the amount and the times that you need to deal with need to be a consideration when you're doing your equipment selection, and how your lights play with your HVAC and how that integrates with irrigation, and preferably even be able to integrate that with your workflow and how you move through your rooms. So 2 golden rules that I always preach to my clientele: efficiency is profitability, and sustainability is risk management. If you can embody these 2 statements and really think about them whenever you're doing anything in your facility, and just keep in mind that as efficient as you can make it, it is going to make you more money. And that if you can become sustainable, you are protecting yourself in the long run. So how can sustainable and regenerative practices really impact cultivation bottom lines, right? So if we're able to minimize our environmental and ecological impacts, and we're able to minimize our resource consumption, and we're able to minimize our waste management still, then we will have lower operational expenses. Now, if we are able to maximize workflow efficiency, maximize our resource recapturing and reintegration, that's what I was just talking about with the energy systems, and we're able to use a facility resource efficiency plan that makes sure that you keep track of what you're using. Energy monitoring is one of the biggest things in sustainability, and it's something that's, again, often overlooked. It comes from a tech sector point of view, not so much a cultivation sector point of view. But if you do not understand every single factor in your facility, being able to calculate multiple data points on it every day, then you really aren't able to truly track your sustainability or your efficiency, or in the long run, your profitability. So having more data is always better. So again, back to your facility design, build those data points in. Build those checks and balances. Build systems around constant monitoring of your environment, of your energy usage, of where things are going. You should be able to track down to milliliters the water in your facility, where it is going at any given point in time, where your heat exchange is, where your cooling exchange is. Everything is trackable in this day and age. We have so much technology at our fingertips. And often as farmers, with our hands in the dirt, we forget that there's this incredible tech sector that is now starting to create things that we can utilize specifically for cannabis. So this is a great infographic that I often actually will refer to myself. I like to stick this on the wall in farms where I go. Excuse me. So when you think about your floor plan, you think about your workflow. Your workflow will help to determine your equipment selection. Your equipment selection determines your resource requirements. That will lead to your plant health, which leads to your recapturing of energy from your plants, which goes right back into your floor plan. So you can increase profit margins by your decreasing of your operational expenses. That is really one of the key things that you can take away economically, is that's the purpose of why we do this. That is the main reason why economically we want to consider sustainability and regenerative systems, is because if we want to make money and we want to be profitable in this market and be able to compete with MSOs and these massive corporations that are coming in, we need to be able to play in an economic level with them. And the only way we can do that is by starting from the ground and creating systems that have that mentality in the long run. So as I had said earlier, Labor is always your largest operational expense. So minimizing labor is really something you should always be thinking about, which leads us right back to the lean operations, which goes right back to the floor plan. And that's why I think that this cycle is really a great representation of the thought process that you need to keep. So when we are thinking about energy, we often just think about electricity like I was saying earlier, but water, temperature, so heating and cooling, whenever you're using heating and cooling in your facility, that means that there's an inverse reaction happening. You can capture that and utilize it, because if you have one area that needs to be heated up, I guarantee you can capture that by coolant and you can use that in another section of your facility, whether it's cooling your offices or whether it's chilling water so that you can utilize it for hash extraction. You can recapture and reutilize this heat. Don't allow this just to sort of passively go into your atmosphere. Utilize capture systems. The recapturing systems that are coming out on the market right now, it's really going to be game changing in the next 5 to 10 years as we start to see the facilities are starting to get knocked off because they can't be sustainable. They can't maintain in this marketplace. They might be able to create great product, but if you create great product and you create it at a higher capital expense or operational expense than your competitors, then you're not going to survive in the market in the long run because you just can't compete with them. They are going to be able to grow faster than you. They are going to be able to put more money into their marketing. They are going to be able to just dominate the market faster and more rapidly than you can keep up with. So when we're looking at indoor systems specifically that we can actually have an impact on sustainably, we look at our media, which is always what everybody thinks of first. You think of soil when you think sustainability, and you think of regenerative ag. So we think about our living microbes. We think about our even aquaponics and dual root zone cultivation styles that can be done well. And then we start to think about, all right, so we've got this media. Now how do we keep this media saturated? How do we keep this media happy? How do we keep our microbiology constantly growing and thriving? Well, that's through our irrigation. Now there's different types of irrigation that we can utilize, and they each have their drawbacks and they each have their benefits. So you really need to tailor to your specific cultivation style, to your specific cultivation facility, which style will work best for you. But consider, again, water recapture, consider waste, consider drip line emitters that might have clogging issues. You want to be sustainable, which means you don't want to be replacing. You don't want to be constantly changing parts out. So you want to select equipment that is geared specifically towards the job you want it to do, not just a job that it's capable of doing. And we think about lighting. Now lighting's coming a long way. I have to say the LED market is really starting to develop exceptional lights. Now ideally, to be sustainable, we would all grow outside under the sun. Unfortunately, we live in Massachusetts. We don't have very many outdoor licensed cultivations right now. And even when we do, we have a pretty short season and it gets real wet real fast at the end of the year. So we're not going to be growing any sativas out here. But what we can do is we can do hoop house, we can do mixed light, we can do supplemental greenhouses. Personally, my favorite style of cultivation is hybridized greenhouses. You get all of the benefits of growing with the sun, you can get all the benefits from exterior air that you can vent in, but you also have the environmental controls of an indoor facility when you really need to dial in and titrate that. So it allows you to sort of play in both worlds. But again, we're Massachusetts. We get real cold in the winters and we get real wet in the falls and the springs. So it can be very difficult to do that here. So unfortunately, we are really pushed to grow indoors, which means we need to really carefully think about which lighting selections we want to use. We need to be very specific about application and about overlap and about efficiency at the micromole level. And ideally, have a quantum meter, be able to test your PPFD right at canopy and make sure that you're constantly checking those data points. Make sure that your lights are as efficient as they say that they are. Make sure that you're getting the overlaps that you want to get. Now HVAC, a lot of people are very familiar with HVAC. HVAC is heating, ventilation, and air cooling. Now HVAC is a term that most people are not yet familiar with, which basically means add dehumidification onto the end of that. Now that is very important because as of conventional agriculture and up until really just a few years ago, almost all cannabis cultivation has been using HVAC and then dehumidification separately. We're treating one of the most prevalent molecules in the air as a completely separate system than the rest of the air. Why would we do that? Wouldn't it make more sense to have an integrated system? And that's where HVAC comes in. They integrate dehumidification into your entire HVAC system so that you can actually get a very accurate moisture capture number in live action so you can watch your plants breathe. Through, again, your data points, you can watch respiration. You can watch your CO2 uptake and offtake. You can watch what happens when you defoliate as far as transpiration happens, all through data points, all through acquisition of pieces of information from sensors. It's really amazing when you get down to it, but what it means to us is that it allows us to be better stewards to our plants. It allows us to be better stewards to our microbes and our soil. Because if we don't know, then we don't know. So you always want to be searching for data, always. And I mean, we're inquisitive people. That's why you're here. That's why we love to learn. So what's a little bit more data? It's just more learning. It's more opportunity to do better. And that brings us to water management. Like I was talking about the recapturing system from dehumidification. Utilizing every piece of energy that comes into your facility and utilizing it to its maximum efficiency. Don't just bring something in, run it through the cycle once, and then run it right out, which is what the vast majority of cultivation does right now. It's what the vast majority of industry does right now. So if we're able to bring water in, feed it to our plants, allow it to go through its cycle, then recapture it from transpiration through dehumidification condensate, feed that right back into our water line systems, send that through a carbon filter UVC treatment so that there's no microbials, and introduce that right back into our water, you can literally minimize your water intake from the city or from your well to a massive, massive scale. It is incredible. You can literally be able to understand and track your water through your facility to a 99% accuracy. And it's all, again, through multiple data points, constantly being collected and allowing you to really understand what's happening in your facility. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it is that data is king. And if you don't know what's going on in your facility, how can you expect to correct it? How can you expect to adapt it? How can you expect to refine it? You need to know on a scientific level, on a numerical level, what's happening on a day-to-day level. Because, I mean, we fluctuate day-to-day, which means my opinion of what's going on may fluctuate day-to-day. We're subjective creatures. We're not really as accurate as a sensor is. And we don't have the capacity to remember down to the decimal what has happened in our grow room for 24 hours for the past 3 months. But when you're able to look at an entire life cycle of a plant and track every single input and resource that you have utilized, now we're talking about efficiency. Now we're talking about sustainability. Now we're able to truly dial in our cultivation and give our plants what they really, really need and let them thrive. So some sustainable practices like we were just talking about, the water recapturing systems, lean operations, which is a great, great thing. If you guys have never heard about lean operations, I highly recommend looking into it. It is something that I've become very passionate about in the past few years because it completely changed the way that I approached workflow. It all starts with a spaghetti chart, and I'll just leave it with that. It's a very interesting little rabbit hole to go down. Now, we were talking about IPM. Integrated pest management is like your first line of defense, really. So it's incredibly, incredibly important that when you think about IPM, and if you're using natural farming, fermentations, or in-house inputs, and biological controls, that we make sure that they all play harmoniously. And that all goes back to being able to create an efficiency of integrating your floor plan, your HVADC, your SOPs, and reducing pest and pathogen incursion into your facility. Like we said, one time something's gonna go wrong. Hopefully it's only once, but I mean, it's usually not. So the best thing to do is prior planning to prevent that to happening. You always wanna be thinking ahead. You always don't wanna be responding, you wanna be anticipating. So when something happens, you already have a protocol in place to deal with it. Think about everything that could go wrong in your facility before it ever goes wrong, and you will be a lot happier the day that it goes wrong. Because you will have a response plan in place, and you will know exactly what to do, rather than trying to figure it out on the spot while the building's on fire, so to speak. So sustainability is risk management. You heard me say this earlier, but what does that really mean? What is the process of utilizing sustainability as risk management? Well, again, it comes back to data. It comes back to us collecting this information. It comes back to getting these pieces of analytical information that we can then look at to identify a problem. Because if you don't have data points and you don't know what's going on, then how can you identify an issue? If we can't identify an issue, then how can we assess it? Once we've been able to assess it, then we can start to do a treatment for it. But then the biggest and most important step in this entire process is being able to monitor and report back on it. Again, this brings us back to our data points. It brings back to collection of information, because if we're not collecting the information, then we can't identify what's actually going on. We can tell something might be going on, something is wrong in my grow, but what? What exactly is wrong in your grow? And if you don't monitor that after the fact, you don't keep tracking these data points and then reporting back in and checking in, you'll never know if you've actually corrected the problem or if you've simply put a Band-Aid on a wound. So some of the regenerative practices that we can integrate into our cycles, into our systems, into our facilities, is creating living soils that have huge diversity, vast amounts of microbes, and that's one of the reasons why I personally am a practitioner of KNF. Even when we're not in the facility. So through capturing and proliferating these indigenous microorganisms, we're able to create IMO 1 through 4, which we can utilize in various ways across our application process through our plants. You can apply it to the soil, you can apply it to foliarly. I'm sure that there's going to be some great conversation about that more in depth later on. But what I want you to think about still is how this all plays back to sustainability. Indigenous microbes are free. You don't have to pay for them. You're not going to a store. You're not buying bottled nutrients. You're not buying bottled microbials. Though they can isolate certain microbes, there's only 99.4% still out there in nature that they can't get. So if we were to just talk about bacteria in the soil, that's 0.00001% of the available bacteria in the soil that can be captured, propagated, and given to you in a bottle, versus indigenous microorganisms, which are already thriving and surviving in your area. So if you capture from a very, very healthy, thriving forest, you're getting the best inoculum that you can. And then you just proliferate that up. Utilize that with your cover crops, green composting, and mulching. You create a fantastic biosphere for them right above the soil that will allow them to do what they do best. They'll create their little microbiome, they will nutrient cycle, they will feed your plants, and they will help to protect you from pest and pathogen incursions. Now, when we think about composting or fermenting byproducts to create amendments, we want to minimize our waste. So another sustainable practice we can do as far as sourcing, talk to your community, talk to the businesses around you, see what byproducts are available that you might be able to utilize in your facility rather than going to a store, rather than going to a distributor, rather than going to any sort of standard conventional resource. You can go out into your area and you can talk to people, work with your community. Sustainability is not just about us. Sustainability is about all of us, which means if your business can help another business, your whole community gets stronger, and that will help support your business in turn. So KNF indoors in cultivation, like we were just talking about, it's really important, in my opinion, that people understand alluvial layers. Leighton Morrison does a great presentation on alluvial layers. I think it's something really worth looking into, especially when you're talking about building sustainability into your system. You're talking about having soil that can run 7-10 years without ever being disturbed. You want to build the natural cycle of alluvial layers that allows for water to properly work its way through your soil network, through your soil structure. You really, really want that rich capacity for aeration and proper hydration through your soil. Now, we were just talking about sourcing local inputs. Proper applications of IMOs and fermentations are helpful for reducing risk of pathogen incursions, but we live in Massachusetts. Again, we have the tightest testing there is. Be very careful in late stage. You will pop pot. So be very, very careful. We do not want you to grow amazing cannabis that unfortunately now has to be bioremediated because of unfair testing protocols. So be aware, but again, it's data points. Do tissue samples of your own. Send it to labs. See where you're at with your plants at different stages of cultivation. Find when your cutoff is, and then utilize that time, that data point. So, what sustainable and regenerative methods can this facility utilize? What do you guys see here that potentially could be better? Quinn.
The lights are not LED.
So the lights, right off the bat, we see we've got big old HIDs looking. So yes, they could be sustainable in the sense that they could be LEDs. Is there anything else? Trellising? Trellising. So trellising, that's a great one. But how do we work our way around that? How can we still produce scrogs, still get that very, very high yield at the canopy level, but not utilize a polypropylene netting? There's a lot of different options out there. You're gonna have to, again, local resourcing. Find what's close to you, because again, it's not just about finding good products. It's not just about finding good resources. It's about finding local resources. Again, sustainability comes back to every single aspect of your system. Now, if we're looking at every aspect of our system, we think about labor has a carbon footprint. Your employees have to drive to you. They have a car. They have things that they need which have to be shipped to you. So if we've got a great product, right, but it comes from the other side of the world, or it comes from the other side of the country, you have to equate that carbon footprint in. You have to think about, is this truly sustainable? Not just is it sustainable within my facility, but is this sustainable as a business practice? Is this sustainable as an overall procedure that you can continue to utilize? And start thinking about these practices at the beginning, in the facility design stage, when you're doing your floor plans, when you're thinking about your actual workflow. Think about your equipment selection. That's equipment selection. A lot of people don't necessarily think about something like trellising or racking as major equipment selections, but they are, because that'll play a huge role into how you harvest. It plays a huge role into how you work around your plants, your IPM scouting, your applications of liquids and foliars, or even just doing top dressing to your soil. So think about not just, is it efficient at what it does? Because obviously it's efficient at what it does, but is it efficient at what it does within the system that you're trying to create? Is it sustainable within the overall structure that you are building within your business? And you need to build sustainability not just into your facility, but into your culture, into your employees. Have that mentality. Have that entire, I don't want to call it corporate culture, but I mean, technically yes. Have that entire corporate culture have a sustainable aspect to it. Gets thirsty up here. So again, we're Acadia Farms. Please follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, and I also now have a new website that'll be being launched soon. We have a line of CBD products that we have on our website, which is currently on sale for the conference, so feel free to go take a look at those. Everything is locally sourced as best as possible. And if you are curious, these are citations that you can utilize. This is where all of my data and my presentations come from. These are not just, resources that you can find on the web specifically. They are, for the most part, extremely well vetted. There are a few in there that are just articles of opinion, but everything else is extremely science-backed data. This is the second. I can't read that. Thank you. Any questions? So before we go to Q&A, I'm actually really curious about something. What other topics would you guys like to hear about next time? Because like we said, this is our inaugural conference, but we're very interested in doing this again, and we'd like to know what you guys would be interested in hearing about specifically. Quinn?
Ben, I thought your presentation was amazing. I would love to see 2 example setups. So you're like, oh, this is a small 4-lighter and a big 50-lighter, and maybe do like a quick rundown on why the small grow is like this and the big grow is like that.
Yeah.
I think it would it would utilize all.
So side-by-side comparisons showing scale.
Yeah.
Definitely. Anybody else? David?
Maybe also adding another part of the talk where you're looking at specific technologies such as wet walls and things like that we can incorporate that we've been doing for years, but now it has a word to it, wet wall. So,
yeah, I had to cut my presentation down a lot.
Or, to show some of those types of physical examples of how we can cut our costs and look at it more sustainable.
Yeah, when I started creating the presentation, I realized within about 20 minutes that I was creating a 3-hour presentation, and I had 45 minutes. So I ended up having to cut a huge amount of material out of it simply to try to expedite the process. I wanted to give everybody a really high-level understanding because unfortunately, not everybody in the room is going to be on the same page. So I have to tailor to a large crowd as far as range of experience. And that's why I started with definitions, work towards it. But yes, I wish I could have put a lot more in. Exactly. Anybody else have anything? All right, excellent. You guys want any questions that you had about the presentation? Anything you want to ask me about the way I do things, why I do things, how I do things? Yeah.
What would you use to trellis your plants?
What would I use personally? Yeah. So I've been working with a company that's been actually looking into utilizing hemp to create propylene so that they can create hemp-based plastic that they're using to, and it's actually also biodegradable. So personally, that's what I would utilize. Right now though, it's not on the market. So at the moment, I let my clients sort of decide what they want to decide. At the end of the day, I am a consultant and advisor. I'm not the one that can tell them what they have to do. And most of them, unfortunately, still lean towards polypropylene.
Because it's not fibrous, correct?
Yes. Yeah, no microbial life will grow on it. And it's easy for them to get a hold of. But One of the things that you're gonna have to focus on when you do sustainability is picking your battles. We don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where there's a lot of issues with supply chain and with resourcing. So though you may have certain things that you're gonna have to compromise on sustainably wise, pick your battles. Like I said, having an efficient facility design and the worst HID lights on the market is a better trade-off because your overall facility runs 24/7. Your HVAC system alone is all day, every day. So you think about the offset of emissions between utilizing crappy lights that suck a lot of electricity and a system that's literally running all day, every day under extreme loads. It's better to have a more efficient, sustainable system and have to utilize a less efficient light. I mean, ideally you can utilize efficiency in all of your aspects, but we also all have to work within our constraints of finances. So sustainability, I would say, is a step-by-step process. Pick some things that are your biggest aspects that are unchangeable. Lights are easy to swap out, an HVAC system is not. Yep. I saw a hand over there at some point. Yes.
What are your thoughts on like a pyrolyzer for something like plastic waste? Like if someone had, lots and lots of plastic sheet mulch and they had a pyrolyzer on farms to be able to produce like diesel or gas out of it. Have you worked with any farms or anything like that to do something like that to reduce plastic waste and increase efficiency?
So I have one farm currently that's actually looking into that because of the amount of plastic waste that they've produced on their 230 acres. That said, pyrolyzation still has a lot of emission. It's better than, I would say, allowing it to degrade and contaminate soil, but you would still have to really look at, what are you actually putting out through that pyrolyzation process, and is there a better way to potentially not utilize that plastic sheet?
Okay.
Yes.
Do you have any data on when reclaiming the dehumidification water and that causing like microbial failures or heavy metal failures with soil in specifically in Massachusetts? We have really low levels for acceptance of bringing media in and then testing it throughout its process.
Yes, 100%, you're correct on that. I do have some data on that. What I would recommend basically is it really comes down to, again, equipment selection and making sure that the equipment that you're utilizing is not adding anything to your system, because I have seen a handful of times where they were pulling water from DHU that was not yet really heavy metal, but the system that they ran it through was leaching. And by the time it came out of that system of condensate, then it was gonna fail without question. It was coming out really hot. So looking at equipment selection, you're looking at where they source equipment for their builds. Personally, when I do a facility design, I won't put any equipment into that facility unless I've talked to the entire engineering team and dug through every aspect of the piece of equipment, because I'm concerned about things like that.
So certain manufacturers of dehumidifiers or HVAC systems have data on.
Yeah. And if they don't, then don't work with them. Because
some of them are made out of copper versus aluminum.
Yes. Difference in materials, different materials will leach different things. And also you need to consider environmental spec, because sometimes you'll have something that won't leach, but then you put it into a room that's, rocking 80, 90 degrees all the time, and you put it near, your heat captures, your heat pumps, and it can get really, really warm, especially when we're looking at facilities like we are in Massachusetts, where we're fitting a lot into a small space. It's not like we've got massive, vast facilities where you've just got large amounts of space between all your equipment so that they can all have their little environmental spec around them. So I would say yes, talk to an individual company, ask to see their data, ask to see their equipment selection and their material selections, and then do your own little bit of digging, because every company, they want to show you their best face. They don't want to tell you their dirty secret, but every company's got at least one. You know what I mean? It's an inevitability of business. So especially when you're in an industry like cannabis, where there's a lot of snake oil and it's very cutthroat, there's a lot of people out there that are shysters, and there's a lot of people out there with very, very low quality equipment that are making high claims. So ask for verification. Ask to talk to the techs, ask to talk to the engineers that design it, ask to talk to even like their manufacturing supplier. Don't be afraid to ask to see everything, because if they are proud of what they built, and if they built what they tell you they built, they'll be happy to show you. They'll be proud to show you. It's like an organic farmer that has an organic certification but doesn't want to tell you. Like, you put in all the work to get there, you're gonna want to tell somebody because you're proud of what you've accomplished. So there are some companies that I personally have worked with that, like I said, if I select a company that I'm going to put in facility, it's because I've really dug through them. So I have my selections of companies that I will personally work with, and there's a reason that they're the only ones I work with, and there's only a handful of them. And there's a lot of companies out there. Yeah, my pleasure. Another hand I saw? I think we've got like 5 minutes left on Q&A. Yeah, Quinn.
I'm hoping to be able to set up a full solar or mostly solar facility at some point in time. Is that something that you see as possible?
Actually, right here in the state of Massachusetts, we have Solar Therapeutics.
Yeah.
And they run almost exclusively solar voltaic, yeah. Sustainability though, solar panels. Be very careful about whose solar panels you use, because solar panels are actually a dirty secret of the green industries. They are very, very, very contaminating. They are not, they're a wonderful, wonderful technology that still needs to, yeah, it still needs to come a long way, and there's no proper way to dispose of them afterwards. So look at longevity, look at replaceability, not the entire unit, but like repairing units. So when you're picking out a solar voltaic system, definitely dig in, definitely dig in. Yes?
Do you have any other recommendations in the area of like lean operations and workflow that you glean from that you would recommend? Any type of like logic modeling?
So like I said, the very first thing, if you're a facility that's already in operation, is a spaghetti chart. It sounds silly, but literally what it is somebody is going to sit there and watch workflow all day long with different colored pens and that floor plan. And they're just gonna watch you walk across and see how many times you overlap and backtrack, and then figure out how from this you can minimize those contact points. You can minimize how many times you have to backtrack, how many times you have to overlap. If you're a company that's just getting started, ground up, then you're prime, because you can work your floor plan around your workflow. And that's also really should be tailored if you're doing it ground up. What is your end product? Are you a flower company? Are you a concentrate company? Because that'll also determine what your end workflow is going to be, because it determines what your actual SOPs are going to be. Anybody else? Yes.
Ben, I really appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared with us today. My question for you is, do you know of any facilities, or do you have any knowledge on geothermal use in the Northeast for dealing with these winters that we have, specifically cannabis production?
Oh, you just hit a hot button for me. I've seen 2. They are probably the singularly most efficient systems that I've ever seen. Their CapEx is huge. A proper geothermal system is incredibly, incredibly expensive, especially if you run like deep well systems with recirculation. But, I mean, I was in a greenhouse in upstate New York. It was February, it was -20 outside, and he doesn't have a heating system, and he was venting 86-degree air out the top of the greenhouse. It's mind-blowing, and it's all from geothermal. If you have the capacity to integrate geothermal into your facility, absolutely do it, but be very, very careful about equipment selection again, be very careful about, so with geothermal, a whole big thing. We'll talk later.
Appreciate it, thank you.
No, it was not in Buffalo.
So I have a question, then we'll do one more, and then we'll wrap up. What do you say to people who tell you that being regenerative in an indoor system is impossible?
You don't have the right data yet.
What was it?
You don't have the right, oh, what was the question?
No, what was the answer?
You don't have the right data yet. If you don't think that regenerative agriculture is capable inside indoor cultivation, then you just have not seen the right data yet. I can personally attest to friends that I have that have been running for 7+ years in the same soil, producing incredibly high quality cannabis and competing in a legal market that is very, very cutthroat, like one of the most cutthroat in the United States. And it's completely possible. The biggest thing that I would say is there's a learning curve. I mean, nothing against people that utilize solubles, but when you're given a feeding chart, it's a lot different than having to learn soil microbiology and the interactions of all of these microbial systems and being able to understand how all of your soil media plays together. And it's not a system where at the end you can just go, oh man, that cycle was a little rough, we made it through, turn and burn, get new ones in there, we'll correct from there. You have to operate your system on a day-to-day basis, understanding the cycles, keeping everything within balance, and just replicating this biomimicry. It's all about biomimicry, trying to maintain your set points. But again, to maintain set points, it brings us back to proper controls, and your proper controls have to have data points to be set at. So it's all about data collection and then equipment selections and facility and floor plan designs that can actually utilize that equipment to the best of its abilities, not make it overwork. Make your facility work for you. Don't work your facility. You know what I mean? If you have the way to make things work for you, do it. Work smarter, not harder. Lean operations is a great way to start with that, but really, again, it's the most important things are floor plan design, facility design, and equipment selection, because if you give me, you know, the best facility in the world and crappy growers and crappy genetics, we'll grow some mids. But if you give me, you know, the best growers and the best genetics and a crappy facility, I will grow you the best looking mold you've ever seen. But it comes down to your equipment. It comes down to your ability to keep those plants in the environments that they want to be in and keep them clean, happy, and healthy. You said one more? Last question. Oh, nobody wants to be the last one, huh?
Maybe the truth, fam. All right, coming back to trellis.
Yes.
I was involved in a place that used basically like sheet fence, like for.
Oh, okay.
Like, and we would like just cut it to size and use that. But then I always worried about like, you know, like metals like coming off of the. You know,
Like metal fragmentation?
Yeah, like again, like I don't know if that's like.
Do you harvest with a chainsaw?
No.
No. So if you're sourcing properly made pieces of equipment and you wanted to utilize something like steel, it's completely possible. I might say look at something that's steel and potentially has a coating on it, maybe a plant-based coating, something to keep the metal from ever corroding, because honestly, I wouldn't be so much concerned about having that metal fragment off as I would be concerned about oxidization of that raw metal, creating rust, and then you've got rust particles in your air, and then you've got rust particles in your product. That would be my biggest concern there. Tried to make up some time. Thank you.
Which one do you like the most?
B.
You like
B.
B?
Absolutely.
A
B,
is
then
close.
A, then C.
Man.
Right?
Oh shit.
Right? Right? Right?
Tell me good.